In this module, we're going to discuss the operations research approach to solving problems. So during this session, it is my goal to provide a basic understanding of the operations research and/or management of science approach that we use to solve and formulate problems. So the scientific approach to decision making usually involves the use of one or more mathematical models. And a mathematical model is a mathematical representation of an actual situation that may be used to make better decisions or to simply understand the actual situation better. So if you think about it, it's an abstraction of the system itself. We have reduced the system complexity down to a mathematical equation, a mathematical formulation. Hopefully the system has lent itself to being reduced to a simple mathematical representation. So like all sciences, we'll use a method to attack our problem. Our method will closely parallel the scientific method used in pretty much all sciences. So I'm sure at some point in your life, your career, your education, you've come across the scientific approach, which is basically identifying a problem. We look at something, we identify a problem associated with it, something of interest. We formulate a hypothesis. We design and perform experiments to basically test the hypothesis. Then we collect and analyze the data that will confirm, validate, or invalidate the hypothesis that we have created. And then we formulate conclusions about the hypothesis that it may need some modification depending on the results from our experiment. So the operations, research, and/or management science method follows a similar approach. First of all, we observe the system itself. We create a definition of the problem. We create a model, an abstraction of the system. We get a solution using various techniques that we're going to discuss later on in the course, and hopefully we'll be able to implement the solution results. If we're unable to implement the results from formulating and solving our model, then for the most part our work has been useless. So we want to make sure that we follow this 5-step process. And keep in mind that this process is iterative. Many times when you find a solution to a problem, you have really just created a new problem in which you need to find a solution at some point in the future. So we observe the system, create a problem definition, construct our model, try to get a solution, and we gain some information between getting the solution and the implementation stage. So we may have this feedback loop in which we realize that in fact maybe we have the wrong problem definition. Maybe we have gone in and solved a problem that doesn't give us our desired results. So we may have to go in and restate what our problem definition. We may realize that we've made a mistake in our model construction. In trying to get a solution to our problem, we may realize that the way that we have constructed our model, it makes it extremely difficult to obtain an optimal solution. Maybe, for example, we had some nonlinear objective functions or nonlinear constraints in our model, and we realize that these constraints and/or objective function is going to make it extremely difficult to solve our problem. So perhaps we can go in and have some simplifying assumptions where we're able to reduce these nonlinear constraints to a system of linear constraints, if the model lends itself to that. And we go in and then we take a model that was nearly impossible to solve, and in a matter of a few seconds or minutes, we're able to actually solve our model. So it's an iterative process. Keep this in mind. So observation. The first step in the management science process is the identification of a problem that exists in the system or the organization. So the system must be continuously and closely observed so that problems can be identified as soon as they occur and are anticipated. So in my opinion, this is one of the most important steps in the process. It sounds trivial and it seems obvious, but no matter how trivial this may seem, it is extremely important. And perhaps it can be best stated as common sense, not so commonly applied. Anyone would obviously say, yes, defining the problem is important. Who would disagree with this? But a clear definition or objective helps to focus attention on what the problem actually is, and it keeps you from deviating into other issues that may not be the focus of your research. So what is a problem? Well, a problem may not necessarily be a problem in the strictest sense or definition. We may just want to make something better or simply identify something that's taking place in the organization itself. So no matter what we are trying to do, I think we need to clearly identify it. And it often helps if we actually write down what the problem is or what the objective is. It could be very similar to a mission statement. So, as an example, I once saw a mission statement of a university which read, "To become the best regional university in the country." So you look at this statement, you look at this mission statement, you say, what does it mean? Well, obviously it means exactly what it says. But when you think about it, when administration begins allocating resources, they can more efficiently allocate resources to address this specific problem. And to become the best regional university in the country is much different than becoming, say, the best university in the country. So your criteria, your metrics are different in how you allocate your resources. Perhaps you shouldn't allocate your resources to focus so much on research or journal publications or conference proceedings. To perhaps becoming the best regional university in the country means that you focus on a specific region, or you focus on teaching. Maybe you look at improving your teaching evaluations of your professors, or you look at reducing class sizes or number of faculty. So while it may seem obvious, the two are distinctly different, and the way you would allocate resources to become the best university in the country is much different than how you would allocate resources to become the best regional university in the country. So like I said, it often helps when you write down a mission statement, and it keeps you on track. It keeps you focused on your goal. In addition, it's important to pick metrics that will help you accomplish those goals. So what would our metrics be in this particular case? Well, here are some examples. We could have a metric where we give a survey and ask students to rate which university is the best, or give a survey and ask professors to rate which university they think is the best. We could count the number of students at the university and compare that to other regional universities. So we could use the metric that bigger is better. We have more students than any other regional university. We could take our average GPA of the students that we have and compare it to the average GPAs of students at other universities. Or we could use a ranking system such as the U.S. News and World Report. Now, when we look at the first four metrics, they may seem ridiculous, and obviously they are, because each one of these metrics are probably going to be biased based on your population. If you give a survey and ask students which university is the best, obviously they're probably going to rate the university they're going to because it would be in their own best interest. The same is true for professors. Count the number of students. Is that really a metric that determines the quality of how well a university is doing? Probably not. Take the average GPA of students and compare them to other universities. This is probably a little better, but that in itself could be biased, because if there's enough incentive for the university to make itself look good, you could simply lower the standards and say, well, we'll give the students a better GPA. We'll make it easier for them to get better grades. We'll let them go through an entire course, and if they see they aren't doing well, they can drop the course and retake it, and it won't go on their transcripts. And some universities have been known to do this. So it's not really a metric that is something. It's not a hard metric. It's something that is subjective, and so what that you're doing well in one of these metrics. It may not say that you're better or worse than one of your competitors. But if you use an accepted or a universal ranking system, say such as the U.S. News and World Report, and you use a system like this, and let the criteria in which all universities are evaluated against, you try to focus on that criteria, then it's probably going to allow you to move towards your goal. So, like I said, it may seem ridiculous, but things like this are done all the time. So, for example, when a company is trying to sell their product or their stock, they'll focus on the metrics that are their strongest points, obviously. But if you're interested in investing in that company or investing in that product, are you really interested in listening to what that particular salesperson is telling you about that company or about that product? Probably not. Maybe you'll go to some third-party source such as Consumer Reports, for instance, if you're trying to buy an automobile. Obviously, if you go buy an automobile from the car dealer, they're going to tell you it's the greatest vehicle in the world. If you go to some unbiased reference such as Consumer Reports, then that's going to give you more of an unbiased opinion as to how good this product is. So it's important that you pick the right metrics and you focus on those metrics. So a lot of times we need to pick metrics that not only describe our strengths but also our weaknesses, because usually our weaknesses is where we have the most room to grow. So the point of all of this is pick a metric and stick with it. If you realize that you're not doing well in something, don't just change your metrics to make yourself look better. Also, be very diligent in picking a metric that accurately describes your problem and, when addressed, will give you the desirable results. Because if you pick metrics that are easy to solve, but they don't necessarily make you a better company, a better institution, a better organization, then you can spend a lot of work and really not see any results for the work that you have spent. So, no matter how sophisticated your model may be and how advanced the solution techniques that you may have developed might be, if they don't accurately describe the problem you want it to, your solution will be wrong. So throughout this course, we're going to be looking at different solution techniques, some of them more advanced than others. And you may be inclined to, use the latest and greatest algorithms or meta-heuristics in the field and, get very good answers, near optimal answers, and at the end of the day, if you pick the wrong problem, then you spent all of that effort and all that work for nothing. So a common example, what I like to call the cost-cutting example to kind of prove this point. So sometimes, quite often, a company gets into trouble financially, and the executives, managers come together to form a solution to get the company out of trouble. So the first thing that usually gets discussed is what is the problem, meaning why is the company in trouble and what can we do to fix it. So obviously this is the correct line of thinking. If we can ascertain what our problems are, then we can take, hopefully the appropriate measures to fix them. So oftentimes this is the most difficult part of the procedure. If we're unable to ascertain exactly what our problems are, then how could we ever hope to focus our efforts on fixing them? And, in my opinion, I feel that this is not only true in the business world, but it's often true in our personal lives. I think a lot of times we misplace our efforts, and when we don't see a return on our efforts or our investment, we get frustrated. And I think this has to do with, the fact that we haven't been able to ascertain what exactly our problems are and what is, causing us the most grief. And sometimes we need a third party to help us figure that out. And the same is true in a business world. That's why you might bring in a consultant or someone, a third party, or, maybe a professor or researcher at a university to give you an unbiased, assessment of your company and what it needs to do to fix itself. So, in the cost-cutting example, sometimes managers attempt to cut cost in order to increase their bottom line. If you look at your revenue you're generating, the cost, revenue minus cost is basically your profit. So if you can reduce your cost, then you're increasing your profit. So, however, if the objective is simply to cut costs, then you may succeed in doing just that, cutting your cost, but not helping out with your profit or your profit margins. So the objective may need to be increase, say, productivity or increase your sales. So cutting cost does not succeed in helping accomplish these goals. In fact, they may be conflicting objectives. So cutting cost, you may be able to, we need to lay off workers, or we need to sell a certain part of the company. But that may not help you increase productivity. Maybe you need to invest in new, more modernized machinery to increase your productivity, or you need to invest in marketing or in your sales force to increase your sales. So cutting costs may not be the best way to actually increase your bottom line. A more holistic approach may need to be taken. And this is something that I have personally observed. A new manager will come into a company, and they the first thing they do is they start looking at how can they cut costs, how can they make the company more lean, more efficient. And it looks good maybe for the first year or so because you see that initial shock of the cost going down, and maybe there's a lag time before you see your revenues decline. But in the long run, this may not be the best way to address the problem. You may need to stand back a period of time before you make any rash decisions and say, what do we really need to do? What is the root problem? And this is a very difficult question to answer, something that I can't answer for you. I can only equip you with the skills that allows you to answer it for yourself, in the context of your business, of your organization. And the answer is it really all depends. It depends on the organization. It depends on the health of the company or the organization itself, the environment you're in. So, what should we focus on as a manager? And this is a very good question and a very difficult question. And like I said, the objective of this course is to equip you with the skills that will allow you to ascertain what the problems are, and then give you, a set of tools that will allow you to go in and solve these problems. Jim Goodnight, he's the owner and CEO of SAS. I once stated that when the day is over, 70% of my assets walk out the door. My goal is to make sure that they return tomorrow morning. And SAS has a very good reputation. It's a very good company to work for. It's consistently ranked as one of the best best companies in the nation to work for. And I really appreciate this statement. When the day is over, 70% of my assets walk out of the door. So he sees it as that he needs to focus on his employees and reinvest in his employees. And the happier his employees are, the more motivated they will be, and the higher the productivity, and that will translate into higher profits and higher profit margins. So it really depends on the company and the organizations. So what are some things that we are trying to achieve when we have a business? Well, here's a few. Obviously, we want to maximize our profits. We'd like to minimize our costs. Are there any others? There are others, but ultimately, any others, you could say, well, maybe we want to increase employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction. Well, that's true, but ultimately these relate to either, increasing your revenue, or reducing your cost, or increasing your productivity. So ultimately, as a company, unless you're a not-for-profit, you're trying to maximize your profit and or revenue. And we'll take a look later on to see how these two relate to one another. But another important issue is, say, maximize profit over what period? Are you trying to maximize your profit over the next quarter, over the next year, over the next 10 years? And, we've seen companies, very large companies, get into trouble over this specific issue. A few companies that I can think of are the American, automotive manufacturers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And if you look at in the, the late 1990s, early 2000, the way that you increased profits was make and sell SUVs. Gas prices were cheap, and there was a very high demand for these products, and the profit margins on these products were extremely high. And, they invested the wrong way. And, for the very short period of time, maybe not so very short, maybe a decade or so, they were doing very well. But eventually, when the market catches up with you and gas prices increased, and, housing prices go up and the markets go down and people have less to spend and they have to start conserving on fuel and that sort of thing. People become more conscious of the environment. They weren't in a very good position to adapt quickly. And other companies, such as maybe Toyota or Honda, that kind of invested in the long term, were in a much better situation. So maximize profit over what period? Now, you can't maximize over the very long period of time, over the next, say, 20 years, because, if you're not delivering good quarterly profits, the investors are going to go somewhere else because, most people may not be interested in a 20-year investment. They might want to see returns over the next year, or the next 2 years, or 5 years. And this is something that you have to take into account. So there's a trade-off here. Do we invest in the extremely short term, the next year, the next month, or the long term, the next 20, the next 50 years? Well, you have to have a long-term plan, but you also have to deliver on the short term. But if we can solve these problems, we basically just successfully solved every business problem in the world with the statement. But as we say, the devil's in the details, and it's how do we maximize our profit and minimize our cost, or maximize our revenues? How do we actually go about doing this? And this is where it gets difficult. So how do we maximize profit? Well, obviously, if we can sell our product at a higher price, that's going to increase our profits. If we can sell more of our quality, that's going to increase our profits. Lower the quality. If we lower our quality, it may maximize profits on the short period of time. And, we see a lot of companies doing this because quality costs money. It actually costs cash. But it also depends on the product that you're selling. If you look at, say, vehicles, for example, what's the average turnover rate of a vehicle? People probably keep vehicles about every 3 or 4 years before they sell. So you don't have to maybe design a vehicle to last 400,000 miles, because if the average person's selling their vehicle with 80,000 miles, that quality, while it's nice to have, may not be what the customers are looking for. Maybe it is. It's really dependent upon your population. How do we minimize cost? Well, we can hire less people. We can pay them less. We can work them more. We can outsource. So will this work? Well, in theory it does. On paper it does. If we hire less people, hey, that's less money that we're paying people. If we can pay them less. The problem is, does this work in the real world? And usually it doesn't. If you think about it, what happens if we sell a product at a higher price? Well, usually, unless it's a very specialized product, you're going to sell less of that product, especially in a competitive market. So, if a bottle of water, one company, can sell for, $1 and another company can sell it for 80 cents, then the company that can sell it for 80 cents, all things being equal, it's going to be the company that wins. What happens if we lower our quality? Well, initially it might be to our benefit because maybe we have a good brand name. Our product is noted for having quality built into it, and then we lower our quality, and no one really knows about it for a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, depending on the life cycle of this particular product and the perceptions that are built into people's memories. So, like I said, for example, when you look at the big three, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, for years and years and years, they were viewed as being some of the highest quality vehicles in the world. But in a relatively short period of time, probably over a decade or two, that perception changed. Now, whether it's true or not is not what I am debating. I'm saying the perception of people and their view towards those vehicles is what changed over time. So it took a period of time, maybe a generation, maybe 20 years, for that perception to actually change. But once it changes, it might take that long for the perception to go the other way, if it ever does. So initially, lowering your quality might be beneficial in the short term because quality, as I said, costs money. It costs less to produce a product that has lower quality. But in the long run, it may not be as beneficial. What happens if we hire less people, pay them less, and work them more? Well, if we hire less people, that reduces our productivity. If we pay them less, it probably reduces, their motivation. If we work them more, like I said, that also probably reduces their motivation, and they simply might leave. And in a competitive environment, this is something that you have to deal with. So as you can see, all of these goals are conflicting. And our goal as an operations researcher in management science is we need to try to figure out how to strike that perfect balance. And this is tough to do, especially in a dynamic world where things are constantly changing. Now we're going to discuss constraints. Can we actually do the things that I just mentioned? So what are some constraints? Well, we might have labor laws that actually don't allow us to work someone 100 hours a week and to pay them, $3 an hour. Workers' personalities. Maybe someone's working in our organization that simply won't accept this. Unions. Unions are a very powerful force. Things that you have to deal with. Competitive market. The market just won't allow you to pay someone, $20,000 to be an engineer because they'll go somewhere else. So the market won't allow you to actually do this. So it's our job to determine what should be done to maximize our goals. But however, this is often done with imperfect information. If we had perfect information, we could go in and build these deterministic models, and we could optimize them every time and get the optimal results. But with imperfect information and in a dynamic world, this oftentimes becomes very difficult. So sometimes our models can be perfect and still do not give us the right results. I mean, this recently happened with the beef industry, mad cow disease, the pork industry, swine flu, the poultry industry, bird flu. Hurricanes, that hit the Gulf region. Maybe they knock out a refinery and gas prices go up. So you have a model that's predicting, what your demand is going to be, and then all of a sudden the world changes. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, these are things that are difficult to do sometimes. But it's our job to try to figure it out. So we know that risk is always a factor in any endeavor, but however, our job is to mitigate and to minimize that risk. Many times it's just as important as maximizing our profit, because if something comes up that we didn't expect and the world changes, it may put us out of business. And in a competitive environment with relatively small profit margins, you can go out of business relatively quickly sometimes. So our job is to minimize or maximize the return on our investment, ROI, return on investment. So I like to think of operations research management science as a sponge. It's like, you have a sponge full of water and you're trying to extract the water from that sponge. When the U.S. first entered into the Industrial Revolution, there was plenty of water in the sponge. Many companies, many industries, factories were highly inefficient. So the first studies that were done on how to improve efficiency, you saw these huge return on investments because no studies had ever been done. But however, as we extracted the water, less and less became available, and it becomes harder and harder to get the remaining water out. So in math and science, there's a phrase. It says the low-hanging fruit has all been picked, which basically means all the easy theories and theorems have all been proven. And in many ways, OR is the same way. With so much competition and developments like OR and many different companies using operations research and management science, it has become more difficult to increase our profit. So we may actually put in much more effort than we used to in getting a smaller percentage of our return on investments than we did in the past. So then you might ask the question, well, if the return on investment is so low, then one may ask, why should we even bother with OR? If you're only getting 0.1% or 0.5% increase in your return on investment, why even fool with it? Why even waste your time, having a team or a department that deals with improving your efficiency if things are working? Well, if you're familiar with a law in economics, it's called the law of one price. It's a very interesting law. It basically describes human behavior. And the law of one price says that identical products on offer at the same time and the same place with prices clearly visible will go for the same price. So let's take a look at why we see so many big winners and losers in life. If you look around at different industries, look at your telephone provider, your cable provider, the number of automotive manufacturers, the number of grocery stores, the number of shopping centers. It's dominated by a relatively few number of players. And why is this? Well, we're going to take a look at this example to give you some insights into this economic theory, and then you're going to see why OR is so important. So I would like you guys to listen to the file that's provided. It's called the Marriage Supermarket .mp3, or you can review the handout that's in the following slides. Or the handout, the document Marriage Supermarket.doc. So this is an excerpt from Tim Hartford's book, The Logic of Life, and it gives insights as to how competitive markets work. Basically, it says small, unnoticeable incremental advantages can lead to huge competitive advantages over time. And this is why OR can be such a powerful tool. While a small return on investment may not seem worth it in the short term, it can have a decisive advantage in the long term. And here is the excerpt from the book that you can read. So I would like you to read over this, or you can listen to the MP3 file. So another interesting example showing how initial small advantages can have decisive impacts is the agent-based model that is written in that logo. It's called simple birth rates. So this model demonstrates the impact of slightly different birth rates between two populations. So while it's an oversimplification of how competitive markets work, it does give you some insights as to how small advantages can build over time, and that's why it's important. This is why OR is important, because you need those small competitive advantages initially to ensure the survival of your company in the long run. So let's explore what happens in this particular model. So in this model, we have two different types of agents. We have red agents and we have blue agents, okay? And the red agents move around and they mate with one another, and the blue agents move around and they mate with one another, and they produce offspring at a certain rate, okay? And the blue produce 2.01 children every time they mate. The red produce 2 children. So it's only a difference of 0.01 or 0.5%, a very small difference. So if I run this model and ask you what will happen, your first inclination is, well, there's going to be, a small number of blues compared to reds. Or there's going to be a small increase, I should say, in the number of blue agents compared to the number of red agents. So it should be proportionately maybe 2.01 compared to 2.0. So we start out with 500 reds, 500 blues. Your initial guess may be, well, there's going to be maybe 550 blues in the steady state compared to 450 reds. We're also assuming that the carrying capacity of this particular environment is 1,000 agents or 1,000 turtles. So you look at this and say, well, blue has a small incremental competitive advantage, only 0.5%. So that means they're going to dominate the market maybe by 0.5%, or maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but somewhere around that number. So maybe 600 to 400 is a good steady state number. But let's go in and let's take a look at what happens when we actually run this model. So our graph here shows the number of reds and the number of blues over time. And we can see that very, very quickly the number of blues increased compared to the number of reds. And we can see that after around 925 ticks that there are no reds left. And if we go in and run this simulation over and over and over, what we will see, so red was extinct, went to 0 after 926 generations. So if we go in and we were to run this over and over and over again, what we will see is that each time red will go extinct. In this particular run, it went extinct after 1,049 generations. And we could run this over and over and over again. This time it went extinct at 561 generations. So we'll run this one more time just to prove a point. This time it looks like it's going to go extinct after 712 generations. So we can see that this small incremental advantage, just 0.5%, gave us a huge increase in the number of which player dominated the market. And if you go in and you have multiple agents of different colors, you'll see the same behavior over and over. And this kind of gives you insights as to how markets work. So this is why it is so important to use techniques like OR to give you that small competitive advantage over your competitors, because in the long run you can build off of those competitive advantages, and those that do have a tendency to be around and be successful business models. Those that don't have a tendency to die out and go out of business. So As you've seen from this lecture, we can just about always improve our system. Throughout this course, you will be introduced to many other techniques that can aid you. These include, but they're not limited to, the following. We're going to be discussing linear programming, nonlinear programming, integer programming, dynamic programming, network analysis, queuing analysis, different types of meta-heuristics, and various other techniques that you can add to your repertoire of knowledge pertaining to operations research. So I'd like you to refer to any handouts supplied with this module. They may be handwritten notes, documents, MP3 files. Also, if available, refer to the optional reference chapter in the textbook. Make sure you complete any homework assignments relating to this module, and review the lecture presentation and notes if you have any questions about this particular module.